it was going to be a stabilization of the bridge ruin. If you've been out there and seen that bridge, you know it's in pretty rough shape. And so that was our starting point, and we had some federal transportation enhancement funds to do that stabilization. The bridge is on the historic registry, and because of that, there was a lot of reviewing that had to be done before we got started on this thing. And in that process of reviewing and going back and forth with the Historic Preservation Office of the state, they kept pushing us to try to do a little bit more. And in that process, we came across some information that kind of changed the whole scope of the project. And that's where I'm going to introduce our design team that has been fleshing that concept out. And this is a group from, the team is from RLK Architects. And I'm going to just introduce Jeff Westendorf, and he'll introduce the rest of his team as they present. But I think you're going to be happy with how things are turning out on this project.
I'd like to thank all of you as well for allowing us to present again in front of you. As Don mentioned, I'm Jeff Westendorf, landscape architect with RLK. With me on my team, I have Miguel Rosales with Rosales & Partners, Kurt Bergerlin with Clark Engineering, Craig David is our art specialty, and Charlene Royce with Hess Royce & Company. As Don mentioned, originally our intent was to create an interpretive area that would be more of a viewing of this bridge from different areas and not really a usable area. The bridge was studied, and it was being basically in jeopardy of collapsing. And if you look at it, it kind of looks like it might be close to collapsing. And studies were completed as to what should be done with this bridge. A lot of you are probably aware of it, but there were some of the studies were just saving portions of the bridge. Others were ranging all the way up to restoring the entire bridge. And what we kind of presented to you last time was something in between, where we had kind of overlooked areas looking at the bridge, trails going under the bridge, but no one on the bridge. After doing some studies of the concrete strength, we found out that the bridge is actually strong enough to hold and support pedestrian loads. So that really changed our direction of our design. So now we're looking at an interpretive site that's usable, and it's not just a bridge to nowhere, but an actual bridge that people can cross. Here's a picture of the bridge right now. One of the problems we had with the bridge was, look at the trail system, everything goes around it, nothing goes to it. It's kind of an isolated little element all by itself. And so one of the first things we looked at is, how do we get people to this bridge? Thanks, Greg. So one of the trails we're proposing is to take a trail system from the corner of Horton and Churchill Street, bring it up around the station, under the bridge, and then reconnect it to the existing Como trail system. We also propose two additional trails, one from the north and one from the south, that will bring you up to the bridge. Due to grades of the bridge itself and the surrounding area, the bridge and the trail are not ADA accessible. The SHPO and the historic sign really pushed for it. If it wasn't that way historically, don't do it now. So we really are kind of funneled down to what we could do with the bridge and the design. Go back up just 1 second. As you can see from the bridge, now having people on here, there's some pretty good concerns having people walk across this. One being, we need to replace this railing. It was knocked off like 50 years ago, so we'll have to replace the railing as well as stabilize the concrete. There's some large chunks, like the one right up in front here. If you actually look underneath it, you can see light, well, 3 inches of light in between that chunk and the bridge. So parts like that will have to be removed, and other chunks will have to be stabilized. We're also proposing to put some interpretive elements around the sites and boards that will help describe the site. That chunk of concrete that I mentioned that we're going to take off, we're going to propose to put down by the interpretive board so people can actually come up to it, touch it, feel it, take a look at it, see what the concrete look like. landscape will be in line pretty close to what was there historically. We're proposing some shrub roses that will line the sides of both of the bridges, and they'll be above the lower retaining walls. We're also proposing some art features, which will be located, could be located at the north part up here, as well as behind the building. And I'll let Craig talk in a little more detail as to what these art pieces could possibly be. Craig?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. As you probably know, the city has a 1% for art charter anymore, and so that was one of the reasons I was called in, is to try to come up with some concepts that would work in terms of art. Well, it posed a bit of a problem because it's a historical site, and you can't really do a whole heck of a lot with the site. But in all of my research in terms of the bridge, the most interesting fact that I found out is that back in the 20s, when was the bridge built? I can't remember. Was it?
05.
05, okay. Yeah, back in the around the turn of the century, there were a lot of topiaries that were done in the park. I mean, it was really known for its topiaries. They built topiary bridges, they built topiary elephants, and generally these were very light structures and filled with moss and annuals. Well, I know that from parks budgets that's probably something like that wouldn't fly. So I tried to come up with something that could either be a replication of a topiary and stand as a sculpture on its own, or be filled with something like a North Korean lilac or a Japanese upright yew. Would fill this thing, and maybe twice a year would be pruned, and that would be about it. And so, and basically the topiaries represent two period figures. I don't know if you've seen any of the old photographs from around the turn of the century, but there's some wonderful images of, so a little bit larger than life. These I've got nearly 9 feet, something like that, where they would be period dress people, created as a topiary sculpture that could be filled with plants, or it could be, if we couldn't find the funds to maintain them, or maybe a garden club or something like that, then I have a feeling once they were up, you'd get some little retired guy or lady. I could see them out there with their scissors every morning and their cup of coffee, keeping these things nice. So it could be possible. I mean, that would be my dream. But anyway, thanks.
So I'm a historian, so I always go back and look at history. So the first thing that we did when I got going on the project was to put together a little report looking at interpretive themes. And probably all of you know the history of this area better than anybody else. And there's some great interpretive panels in here. But one of the things that we'll be doing is bringing the interpretation outside and putting it in areas around the bridge where it will have an immediate relationship to the bridge and to other things outside. One of the themes we're looking at is the park is really, this park was a catalyst for the park system's development. This was the park that really caused people to say, we need a park system, we need to get it going. And there were a couple of phases of the park's development in the 1880s, 1890s. And then it really hit its prime in the early 20th century as Craig was talking about with the topiaries and these incredible formal displays. And it really has a lot of parallels to what was going on in the national scene in terms of parks and landscape architecture. The picturesque, there's a word over the picturesque is exactly what was the prime of what this was happening. But there was also kind of social reasons for parks. They were the lungs of the city. They were to wear people out so that they wouldn't commit crimes. There were all sorts of social aspects. And there was also a lot of real estate aspects. Values of land go up by parks. And so a lot of people got interested in park development because of that. And we're fortunate here in St. Paul to have Horace Cleveland having been involved with the design of the park system. He was also involved with the Minneapolis system, Chicago parks. Really an important, that was before people called themselves landscape architects. So he called himself a landscape gardener. But he played a very important role in the evolution of a bunch of park systems, and we're really lucky to have him here. And then, of course, there's the theme of the Twin City Rapid Transit Company. There was this sort of love-hate relationship between the parks and the train. The parks needed trains to get people out here. They wanted a lot of people to use the parks, and this was kind of on the edge of nowhere, so they needed that. And the trains needed to have people to justify extending their lines. But who was going to pay for what and all this stuff was always a bit of a discussion. So that would be an interesting theme to talk about. And then finally, coming specifically down to our wonderful bridge here. Concrete bridges like this were a pretty recent creation in the early 20th century. For one thing, concrete that wouldn't dissolve when it got wet, or cement that wouldn't dissolve when it got wet, was a fairly new thing. Portland cement was developed, artificial cement, in the mid-1800s, but it didn't really become common here in the Midwest until the late 19th century. So this was a pretty cool new technology, plus the wonderful addition of reinforced steel and stuff. So that'll be another theme that we'll be talking about. This happened to be a Mellon arch named after its designer, an Austrian engineer. So there'll be some really fun interpretive things, and I think that maybe we could switch. Yeah, so here's an example of just some of the visuals, and we work with Miguel and design these things, and I think we've come up with some really pretty graphics. And then we want to just switch to the next one. So this, this is one possible concept of the kind of any other. So let's turn it over to Kurt.
Excuse me, my task was to help evaluate the condition of the bridge and determine what we could do structurally. First, everyone said we were going to just stabilize the bridge, essentially put in a shoring or false work system, leave everything kind of as it was so that you can see, and then you can be able to see the steel, structural steel, the arch that's in the Milan arch, which is over the four things. But as the project evolved, and the main thing that changed our mind was we took some core samples through the base of the arch and came up with some tremendously high compressive strengths. And the tests were around 10,000 psi, which is, I don't know if you guys know what microsilica concrete is nowadays, but it's really strong. It's a basic aggregate, basically three-part mix, just crushed aggregate, cement, and sand. And I was reading some of the history on the Milan arch and the concrete, and it's got a really unique aggregate in it too. So since we knew that they had that much strength in the concrete, and it essentially acts as a compression, it's like a Roman arch, essentially at the, really what makes it corrode is the reinforcing steel that they put into it. But so if you could do flip our drawings, yeah, these are the ribs that are inside that are partly used for forming and kind of reinforcing, but they didn't really know didn't fully understand reinforced concrete. So they're kind of not necessary at this point. The steel back in here, the flat arches is working. That's just like a regular old reinforced concrete slab. So now what we're going to do, instead of leaving it look like that, we'll chip back, restore all the concrete. You have the drawing in there too? Yeah. This is we have two different elevations. There's one of the arch face has fallen off on this elevation, so the areas in shade will be, essentially the original concrete will be restored, and then we'll patch it and try to match at least the shape of the other deck. It will be kind of difficult to match the actual texture because they get a unique form lining. When they built this, they put the forms in and actually lined the forms with like a plaster or something, wasn't it? And then they poured the concrete, so there's this beautiful uniform layer it's amazing how well it's still stuck to the concrete. I don't know how we could replicate that. So then structurally, we're going to repair it so that you won't see any more of the steel. We did talk originally about leaving the arches exposed on the bottom, so at least you can kind of see the interpretive part of what's in there. But that will still be kind of worked out. But and then the idea on this side, all of these railings got, well, I call them railings. Well, there's going to be two different kinds of work. There's vertical patching on the faces, underside here, and then there's some slab edges that have to be recreated where the slab edge is broken off. And then there's areas where the whole curve edge, you go back to the east elevation. Up here, there's the decorative curve section is broken off. So, and then there's the piece that we're going to take off that Jeff was talking about. So once we get it all concrete restored, then there'll be new precast railing pieces that are well. One source in town that's already done some work at Como Park. You go to the next railing sections. Do we have them on there? No. This is where we got these railing details from the engineers used color will be, but they'll have new railing, and then the deck surface will be, you know, the herringbone crack, the patterning of the pavers up there, that'll either crack, so it'll be sealed with silica, like sand, grout mix, or not exactly sure, but, so you'll retain the historic look of the deck, and you'll have the railings. So I'm not exactly sure what it'll be a kind of a combination of new and old, so, but that's where we've ended up structurally. And so we're comfortable having people on it and under it, so it'll be a useful bridge. So that's.
Well, I think that the beach is very nice, has very good proportions, and we're lucky that it can be restored. This view shows how it will appear, when it's completed. You have the new railing, which is actually going to be up to standards. It's going to be 42 inches high, and it's going to have a space that would allow to comply with the requirements. And then you have a path underneath, and people again will be able to experience the arch, which to us is the main feature of the bridge. There was a period that you could not go underneath because it has very nice shape. And there were places where you could be able to see the arch in conjunction with interpretive signs, and then you'll be able to study both at the same time, which is quite interesting. With a lot of detailing about how to you did the correct spacing of the railing because we wanted to be that up to code. And they're a little bit closer together than the original, but if you see the railing, it's not really opaque. It still works pretty well. These are smaller drawings that we prepared. And this is just a kind of a sequence of what could you do. You go under the bridge, and then you'll be able to go up. And then you'll be able to see more of the bridge and the next one. And once you are up there, you have a very nice view. Actually comes to a peak, so it's it's kind of a very high point. And also it has a very good width. It's 15 feet wide. So usually a lot of pedestrian bridges now they're 12 feet. So actually this is extra wide. So if there is any bicyclists or pedestrians or people with children, there will be enough space. The last one. And then, we propose that at night you add some lighting under the arch, and I think that will create like a gateway together with this building, and something that is not very expensive. You can use LED lights right now, that have very low maintenance, and it creates a very dramatic effect, for people like jogging or using the beach at night.